All right, guys, welcome back. Sorry about getting cut off there. Back to the results of the plague that we're going to see across Europe. Again, religious fervor and extremism. Really, you could say that the entire fabric of society is frayed. I think that is a good way to put it that the authors use. Things are turned upside down. We are going to see a rise in educational institutions. These are going to be more localized than they had previously. So we're talking about colleges and universities. Somebody has to replace these clerics who pass away during the plague years, and we are going to see colleges rise up to take the place of those educators and with new sorts of faculty. More and more so, we're going to see less international students in these places and more kind of localized student bodies. And again, the reason for that is because there is sort of less, I guess you could say, a less global spirit in the years following the plague, and kind of a growing distrust of foreigners would probably be a good way to put it. All right, now another factor that's going to kind of bring an end, a grinding halt to the Middle Ages, is the Hundred Years' War. And I have a little diagram here to help you understand the beginnings of the Hundred Years' War and how this all comes into play. Essentially, if you remember, after William of Normandy, William the Conqueror, had conquered England in 1066, England was more or less, the King of England was more or less a vassal to the King of France. Um, Now, there were some sort of agreements in place that allowed that arrangement to work. For example, England, for becoming vassal to France, was allowed the territory of Aquitaine, which was here, and they were essentially given ownership of that. And in return for that, the French king got English allegiance. So this all kind of comes grinding to a halt when Charles IV of France dies with no child in 1328. Okay, so he's going to be the end of what's called the Capetian dynasty. Again, Charles IV dies with no son, no heir, and so the question becomes, who will take the throne of France? Now, Charles doesn't have an heir, but he does have a sister, Isabella, who is married to King Edward II of England. Now, maybe you're thinking, Edward should become the King of France. Well, that's not going to work because Edward is not alive anymore, but he does have a son with Isabella named Edward III. Okay? So Charles IV has died. Edward III eyes the crown, okay, with Isabella's backing. Now, the French nobles really don't want anything to do with this Edward III and his mother, with these English people coming over to take the throne of France. So they essentially choose their own heir, okay? And the person that they choose is a guy named Philip IV, okay? He is Isabella's cousin, right? So he is related to the former king, but the question that, of ascendancy to the throne uh, is hazy here. So this is going to kind of be the spark that starts this war. We're going to see a fight between England and France over that French throne to see who takes the place of the deceased Charles. Now, long term, I mean, you could call that dispute over the Aquitaine region, which had been given to the English, a major cause. Philip IV, of course, tries to cut the English out. When he does this, Edward III is going to question his legitimacy. And when this happens, it really upsets the feudal order in France. And the reason is because France is a very divided place. A lot of people in France are not loyal to Philip IV. Okay, so they are going to give, and I keep saying Philip the Fourth, and what I mean to say is Philip the Sixth. I apologize for that. They are not loyal to Philip the Sixth. They are looking for a way to increase their own territory, their own holdings. So naturally, what they do is back Edward of England. Right? They're really trying to cause strife in France and sort of advance their own feudal career, so to speak. So this kind of degenerates into a French Civil War. You have especially people in the Burgundy region of France supporting the English king's claim. Other French people and lords and nobles are supporting Philip's claim. Wool is a big part of the issue here. This is an area called Flanders. They have a very important wool trade with the English. The traders in the cities of Flanders were, of course, leaning towards the side of the English because they want to keep that trade up. And the war is on by 1337. Now, public opinion in this war is really important on both sides, and we see the growth of nationalism on both sides. In England, I mean, the idea is that, and the way it's sold is that this war is being waged to give Edward III the crown he's been denied. And it's really a popular conflict in a lot of ways. It equals out opportunity. Knights have a chance. Criminals can serve in the military to avoid jail sentence. Lords are made. Fortunes are made. And as one knight so eloquently put it, it was a great opportunity to loot and pillage the fair and plenteous land of France. Um, Up until 1419, the main theater of the war, the main place that it was fought, was France and the Low Countries, which are sort of the northern areas that you see here today. It would be, places like Holland, Belgium, and so forth. A lot of cavalry raids, a lot of sieges, and sieges, of course, is when a castle, is surrounded or a city is surrounded. Meanwhile, the French sponsor raids by the Scots, who are up here, of course, into England. The Scots are no friends of the English and historically haven't been. So the French are sponsoring Scottish raids into England. That being said, the war is primarily fought in France, so keep that in mind. Key battles of the war, the first and maybe most important major victory for the English that's noted in the history books, at least for our purposes, is the Battle of Crecy. Uh, it's a stunning victory for the English over a much larger French force. And here the English prove the use of the longbow. If you ever seen one of these things in action, they're 6 feet long. In skilled hands, they could penetrate French armor. So much for the romance and chivalry of knights on horseback, because after this, we're going to see warfare change forever. Artillery is also used for the first time in a major way here, and we're talking about like sort of rudimentary cannons that sort of bring castles come crumbling down. And again, this is a major blow to the whole sort of medieval thing that we have in our minds. Edward III's son, a man named Edward the Black Prince, rampages through France. At one point, he actually captures the French king, King John II. And if you're thinking, why is the king now King John II? Keep in mind this is called the 100 Years' War, so we're progressing very quickly. And leadership is changing, and the tide of war is sort of ebbing and flowing. The war is temporarily halted as the king is ransomed back to France. So it kind of makes you wonder what the motivations were here. If the English captured the French king but sold him for gold back to the French, what was the purpose of this war? Nothing other than loot more than anything else, I think. England couldn't capture all of France. Even after the king was taken and ransomed back, the war begins again. At Agincourt, we get another key victory for the English. This is by Henry V, and it's immortalized in Shakespeare's Henry V play. Again, the longbow is prominent. We see major French casualties. Now, out of this turmoil rises a very, and I'd say maybe one of the most interesting characters in European history, and that is Joan of Arc. Joan is a peasant girl from a small village. She grew up in a very religious household. When she was in her early adolescence, she began to claim to hear voices, voices of the saints. They told her, in the midst of all this turmoil and conflict, that she needed to approach the uncrowned king of France, Charles VII. Again, succession had been an issue. The French were on the ropes. Charles's dad had actually disowned him and sided with the English. It tells you how messed up things were. She goes to him and says, "We have to pick up the fight here. You need to be crowned, and we need to fight." He checks her out. He figures maybe we have nothing to lose, and he essentially gives her control of the French army. Here's a girl, a peasant girl, in a time when women had really no social standing whatsoever, given control of this army. She wins a major victory at the Battle of Orleans. They crown Charles. That seals her reputation. She had seen this crowning in a vision, right? And it happens, okay? So the war has ground to a halt in 1453. A lot of economic effects. England was mostly untouched, but wool exports suffer. Politically, Parliament gets even more powerful because they have controlled the purse strings. In France, the country is in shambles and trade is disrupted. Politically, the monarchy becomes stronger. No representative parliament. but nationalism grows in both countries, and that is it.